Today at 6, MPs are recalled to Parliament for an emergency debate on Afghanistan, and from all sides they attack the government's handling of the crisis. The Taliban secure their positions as the new rulers, and Afghans wonder what the future holds. Here there is talk of betrayal.
Like many veterans, this last week has been one that has seen me struggle through anger and grief and rage.
We must deal with the world as it is, accepting what we have achieved and what we have not achieved.
These are the lucky ones. Britain will take 5,000 refugees this year, but what of all those left behind?
I'm Secunder Kermani, live in Kabul, where residents are still grappling with what this Taliban takeover means for their lives.
We'll be hearing from the local councils ready to welcome Afghans. Also tonight, a surprise drop in the rate of inflation, but the experts warn of trouble ahead. Have festivals and staycations contributed to COVID hotspots? We'll look at the latest evidence.
Cinderella, Cinderella is the cat.
A new take on the oldest fairy tale of them all. 3 years in the making, Cinderella is finally ready to open.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, we look ahead to the AIG Women's Open as the final major of the year gets underway at Carnoustie tomorrow.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. Boris Johnson and his ministers have come in for some scathing criticism as a recalled Parliament held an emergency session on Afghanistan. Two broad questions dominated the attack from MPs on all sides. How is it that the Taliban are back in power? And what does Britain do now for those Afghans who fear for their lives? We'll have more from the House of Commons in a moment, and we'll be live in Kabul. But first, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, on a nation now facing an uncertain future.
A girl at the gate, screaming, "The Taliban are coming, they're coming for me," pleading with Western soldiers at Kabul airport to let her in. This is the front line of fear in a capital turned inside out. The people who've had to run the gauntlet of new Taliban checkposts along the main road to the airport. Many Afghans say they're trapped. They're sending SOS messages to the world. These are just some sent to me. And this one I've just received from someone who's been working at the British Embassy in Kabul, saying he's been to the gate of the airport 3 times. He says his children were almost killed when the Taliban opened fire on the crowds. He, like others, is calling for a safer route out. Otherwise, he says, it's better to stay at home and wait for our death. Afghans and foreigners are now managing to make it onto the airfield, onto one of many lists in this massive evacuation. Everyone at the start of a new life, whatever their age. The UK, among many countries, doing what they can to help.
To get through the workload, to get the people that we need to get out of here to safety. How long have we got? It really depends on other things outside our control, the security situation, the approach of the Taliban. We're working on the basis of days, not weeks, so we really do have to get those numbers through.
Flying in, Taliban leaders, including Mullah Baradar, founding member of the Taliban, now tipped to be president. First stop, an emotional return to Kandahar in the south, birthplace of the Taliban movement. Now they're creating a government. In Kabul today, a former president, Hamid Karzai, was in talks with one of the youngest Taliban leaders, 26-year-old Anas Haqqani. The family linked to the Haqqani network, blamed for some of the worst attacks on Afghan civilians. the youngest Haqqani now cast as a messenger of peace to political leaders who haven't left. But some Afghans are still resisting the change. Protests today in the eastern city of Jalalabad. Afghans still holding on to their national flag. But the old order is gone. The Taliban enforcing a new one. Lise Doucette, BBC News.
And our correspondent Secunder Kermani is in the Afghan capital, Kabul, and in the last few minutes, he sent us this report.
This is the centre of Kabul, and this is a city that's gradually returning to some kind of normality, even as its residents process the dramatic events of the past few weeks. There are more restaurants and shops that are open today than there had been in previous days. There's more traffic in the streets, more people in the streets, though not quite as many as usual. And in particular, there are fewer women, though I have seen some, and not necessarily wearing the all-encompassing burqa. The fear is, of course, that in the coming days, the coming months, the Taliban will impose more of their strict restrictions on women. There's also a strong presence of heavily armed Taliban fighters patrolling the city in vehicles like this. They say they're here to prevent looting and unrest. Despite their assurances of an amnesty for those linked to the government, many who are here will be deeply fearful for their future.
Secunder Kermani there on the ground in Kabul. Now, a key theme of the debate in the Commons today, the first we've seen without social distancing since the pandemic, was Britain's response to the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Afghanistan. Mr Johnson was accused of not doing enough to help those desperately seeking to leave the country. The government has announced plans to allow a total of 20,000 Afghans to settle in the UK, including 5,000 in the first year. It will focus on women and children as well as religious and other minorities in greater danger from the Taliban. Our political correspondent Ben Wright reports now from Westminster.
Prime Minister, have you let down Afghanistan?
A statement was written, the explanation prepared. Boris Johnson headed to Parliament, brought back from its summer break.
Prime Minister.
The chamber was crammed, shoulder to shoulder. Now restrictions are lifted.
The sacrifice in Afghanistan is seared into our national consciousness, with 150,000 people serving there from across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. No matter how grim the lessons of the past, the future is not yet written. And at this bleak turning point, we must help the people of Afghanistan to choose the best of all their possible futures.
The Prime Minister said the US pullout from Afghanistan meant there was little Britain could do. Labour's leader agreed there was no military solution, but said the government had failed to prepare.
There's been a major miscalculation of the resilience of the Afghan forces and staggering complacency from our government about the Taliban threat. The result is that the Taliban are now back in control of Afghanistan. The gains made through 20 years of sacrifice hang precariously.
Tory backbench anger was growing, and one former Prime Minister was scathing.
Was our knowledge of the position on the ground so inadequate? Or did we really believe this? Or did we just feel that we had to follow the United States and hope that on a wing and a prayer it would be all right on the night?
Watching on, a demonstration demanding all Afghans who work for the UK can move here, and there is already a scheme in place. Ministers have said the UK will also take in up to 20,000 refugees over the next few years, including 5,000 this year. In the Commons, there were cross-party calls for more.
It should have a minimum commitment of welcoming at least 35,000 to 40,000 Afghan refugees in the UK.
Numbers matter less than need. We need to reject this artificial distinction between resettlement and asylum.
Today's debate revealed the depth of anger and anguish at what's happened. The words spoken here will make little difference to the immediate situation in Afghanistan, but Boris Johnson looked isolated as MPs queued up to ask how a 20-year commitment unravelled so fast. No more so than those who had served in Afghanistan, fighting in a campaign that cost the lives of 457 servicemen and women.
Like many veterans, this last week has been one that has seen me struggle through anger and grief and rage, the feeling of abandonment of not just a country, but the sacrifice that my friends made.
The House of Commons, full for the first time in over a year, had rarely seemed so quiet.
It's shameful.
George, several things were striking about today's debate. First, the sombre mood as MPs absorbed what almost all regarded as a serious foreign policy failure. Boris Johnson insisted that a key objective had been met, the removal of al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. But there is deep cross-party concern here about what comes next. Second, Theresa May, I thought, spoke for many MPs when she said that the West now looked much weaker than it had before. There was no vote today, so this debate doesn't change government policy. So for now, all MPs can do is watch as the evacuation from Kabul continues.
Ben, thank you very much. Now, throughout the day, council leaders across the country have said they are ready to provide a safe haven for those fleeing Afghanistan. They're calling on the government to make more money available to fund the resettlement schemes. Our correspondent Alex Forsyth has been to Calderdale in West Yorkshire to see how one community is preparing to welcome Afghan refugees.
Lunch at St Augustine's is about far more than food. This centre supports asylum seekers, offering advice, guidance and a sense of community. Here, these families know what it's like to have to flee your home. Jamshedullah was an interpreter for the British Army. He came to the UK through an official route, but now can't contact his family, who are still in Afghanistan.
I couldn't get to my mum and dad like 2 months. And I really don't know about them, how the situation of them will be at the moment. And it's just a heartbreaking situation.
The concern about recent events is palpable. Habib, which is not his real name, has family in Kabul. He's desperate for them to join him here.
There's my mom, brother and sister left and wife. So they're speaking all cry.
They're all crying?
Yeah.
How are they feeling?
This feeling is no good. It's bad.
Here, the idea of a scheme to help resettle refugees from Afghanistan is welcome. But they question whether it will be enough, whether some might try to make it on their own. Florence didn't come to the UK through official channels. She claimed asylum in 2016 and said the process can be tough.
I was not allowed to go to school. I was not allowed to do anything within my community.
How was that?
So it was really bad. I felt like I'm in a country that came to seek safety, but it's worse than I was before.
This part of West Yorkshire's long welcomed those seeking sanctuary. For more than 20 years, Calderdale's taken in asylum seekers, and it volunteered to settle Syrians during the war. The council says it's ready to step up again, but the leader says they must have support.
We want to be open and welcoming, but we do need proper support from the government to enable us to do that without it having an impact on local people and local services.
In Halifax town centre, there's empathy for the plight of Afghans and awareness that public services, not least housing, are under pressure.
Half of me says that, yes, I think we should help out, which is what we're doing. The other half, right, is saying, well, there's obviously people in this country, right, who are British citizens, right, who need help and support.
If it stays at 20,000, that's fine. But it's when it starts to get into 500,000 and 1 million people.
Where else are they going to go? I think it's really important that everybody opens the doors to these people.
That is the political challenge, balancing the need to open the doors with the needs of existing communities, a challenge with much at stake for so many. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Halifax.
Back live to Kabul now, and our correspondent Secunder Kermani. Secunder, you've watched this country as closely as anyone. I just wonder what your take is today on the situation now.
Well, two very different scenes in Kabul. At the airport, utter chaos. I saw Taliban members firing into the air, beating people with sticks. trying to control the crowd. Contrast that with the city centre, where shops and restaurants are opening up and people are going out to eat ice cream. What I can't stress enough is how significant a presence the Taliban have in this city now, and how surreal it is to witness it. I mean, every few minutes, one of their patrols passes by, and they're heavily armed. We're talking about powerful assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenade launchers. For the moment, their attitude seems to be fairly friendly, but the concern, of course, is how long that will last. We've seen these protests in the east of the country now being met with violence, at least 2 people being killed there, I'm told. Publicly, at least so far, the Taliban have adopted a fairly conciliatory attitude and tone, but many fear that they're not going to brook any kind of challenge to their authority.
All right, Secunder, thank you very much. Clearly, these are disturbing times for lots of people, and for details of organisations which offer advice and support with mental health, go online to bbc.co.uk/action line. On to the government's latest coronavirus figures now, and they show there were 33,904 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average, there were 30,177 new cases per day in the last week. 6,321 people are currently in hospital with the virus. 111 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours, with an average of 94 deaths a day in the past week. On vaccinations, 89.6% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab, and more than 77.5% have had 2 jabs. Now, after falling over recent weeks, the average number of daily confirmed COVID cases is now showing signs of a small rise. So how much pressure is there on local areas? Have COVID hotspots appeared because of staycations or events like music festivals? Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
There hasn't been the big surge in infections which some experts had predicted for August. UK case numbers are lower than mid-July, but there are some areas where there's been an increase in recent weeks, including Cornwall, partly linked to the influx of holidaymakers. There have been reports of positive tests among some of those who were at a surfing and music festival at Newquay last week. Local officials say it's too early to judge that from the data, but they acknowledge that COVID has been spreading in some parts of the county.
As people mix in large numbers, particularly if they're unvaccinated, there's the likelihood that there will be spread amongst that particular age group. We are seeing in general that the 18 to 30-year-olds are having the highest rates of infection in our area.
Of the top 10 infection hotspots in England as of last week, 3 were in Cornwall. 2 more were in the Isle of Wight, another tourist destination. Some others were further north in England. That's in terms of cases relative to the local population.
We're going to see influxes of people to certain holiday destinations, and while that doesn't change the official population figures, it means that there are a lot more people within an area, and a lot more people in an area means there is going to be much more chance of COVID and much more chance of transmission.
Indoor social mixing was cited as a factor in an infection spike in Lincoln, with a surge in cases linked to a nightclub, though numbers have since fallen back. There could be implications for hospitals, and the NHS in the southwest of England has come under greater pressure, with ambulances having to wait at some hospitals to hand over patients.
We've got a combination of some rising numbers of COVID cases, but that's set alongside the fact that people are trying to go full pelt to recover the care backlogs. We've also got lots of people who are seeking urgent and emergency care at the same time as staff are off on leave, and also we've had large numbers of staff self-isolating.
With pop-up vaccination centres, local health chiefs in the southwest are urging people to get their jabs and do regular lateral flow tests. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
And the time is 19 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. The Taliban secure their positions in Kabul as the UK commits to taking in 5,000 Afghan refugees within a year. Still to come, confirmation in Scotland that students there will take their exams as normal next year, if it's safe to do so.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, more disruption to the Formula One calendar as the Japanese Grand Prix is cancelled over COVID concerns. It's the second successive year the race is off due to the pandemic.
We've got the latest official figures on the cost of living today, and it turns out that prices are not rising by as much as some were predicting. The Consumer Prices Index, which is a way of measuring inflation, was 2% in July. That compares to 2.5% the previous month. Cheaper clothing is one reason for the dip in the rate of inflation. But there's a warning, inflation could go much higher later this year. Our Consumer Affairs correspondent, Coletta Smith, reports.
In the last few weeks, there's one thing that's been stretching budgets across the country. Fuel prices have been rocketing. In fact, the July fuel price was the highest seen in 8 years.
There have been some pretty good summer sales when it comes to clothing and shoes, and that's been keeping prices overall a bit lower. But the thing that's still been pushing inflation up are those eye-watering petrol and diesel prices.
And with more long road trips for holidays in the UK this summer, people are really feeling the cost of a full tank.
When you fill a car up, fill a car up like that costs about £70.
He travels about 25 miles there, 25 miles back every day for work, so it's a big expense really for diesel, isn't it? But yeah.
Oh, it's pretty expensive again, 130 odd locally.
It's not just drivers who are impacted. This month's inflation figure is normally used to set the price rise for rail season tickets, but not this year. The government say they haven't yet decided when or if they'll be putting prices up. That's music to the ears of transport campaigners.
It'd be really good news if in January we hear that there's no increase. The situation really is going to be terrible if they were to increase it. I can't imagine that they would, because we're coming back from a pandemic and we need to get people back on board and get people in towns and cities spending.
But it's not all bad news for those splashing out over the holiday season. Summer clothing sales are back after the disruption of last year.
Well, I just assumed it was because lots of this season's clothes weren't selling, with people not going away on holiday and that kind of thing, so everything's been slashed.
Although prices haven't increased as quickly as some economists were expecting, costs will go up more in the autumn because a big energy price rise will kick in at the end of September.
All of this is putting the Chancellor under pressure to scrap his plans to increase the pension rate by more than inflation, the so-called triple lock. Pensioners are due an increase of around 8%, which is a pay rise most of the workforce can only dream of.
With household budgets set to be squeezed on all sides after a summer holiday spending splurge, it's time to buckle up for the months ahead. Coletta Smith, BBC News in Barnsley.
Exams in Scotland will go ahead as normal next year if it is safe for them to do so. The Scottish Government said National 5, Higher and Advanced Higher exams would be held in spring, providing public health advice allows them to take place. Well, our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon is in Glasgow for us. Lorna, there's been a lot of debate over the last few months about how children should be tested, but the government opting for traditional exams.
Yes, George, exams are back, but the Scottish Government is being upfront in saying that contingency plans are in place should COVID create difficulties over the coming academic year. The first backup plan is to further modify courses that have already been modified, while the second is that if COVID creates difficulties that mean it's not easy or reasonable for exams to take place, they will be scrapped again for the third year running and replaced with teacher-assessed grades. Well, across the UK, ministers and qualifications regulators have been clear that they expect exams to take place next year. So Scotland is the first place to announce these contingency plans. But the main teaching union here says they want the focus over the next year to be on teaching and learning, not gathering evidence for assessments and for these contingency purposes, while the Scottish Conservatives say it's a dereliction of duty for the SNP to announce this only once schools have returned.
Lorna, thanks very much. The trial of the Grammy Award-winning US singer R. Kelly got underway today at a US federal court in New York. The R&B star is accused of racketeering, sexual abuse and bribery, charges which he has denied. If the singer is convicted on all counts, he could face 10 years to life in prison. Samira Hussain reports.
For R. Kelly's many accusers, this federal court in Brooklyn is where, finally, their voices may be heard. John Jalen Savage is here. For years, she has been pushing for charges against Kelly. She says her daughter had been held captive by the musician.
We suspect that the open statements will open some people's eyes. What we've been knowing for the last 5.5 years when we started this journey, because we knew something wasn't right and we knew that it had to stop.
In those opening statements, prosecutors said Kelly targeted, groomed, and exploited young girls and boys for his own satisfaction, and that this case is not about a celebrity who likes to party, but a sexual predator. Are accused of recruiting women and girls to engage in illegal sexual activity with the R&B singer. He is also accused of paying victims and witnesses to cover up his alleged crimes.
I didn't do this stuff.
R. Kelly has been confronting allegations of sexual abuse for more than 2 decades, but the only time he faced criminal charges, back in 2008, he was acquitted. These new charges against R. Kelly are far more serious, and this time several victims will testify against him. But also, perhaps there has been a shift in culture. The Me Too movement has made it harder for rich, famous abusers to hide their misdeeds. Samira Hussein, BBC News, New York.
The comedian Sean Locke has died from cancer at the age of 58. Performers and writers have been paying tribute today.
I don't think a dictionary's got enough words in it to describe me. You know, I think I'm such
an acclaimed stand-up and sitcom actor, he was perhaps best known for his long-running work appearing on the panel show 8 out of 10 Cats. The comedian Sean Locke, who has died at the age of 58. Entertainment and theatre in particular has been one of the sectors hardest hit by COVID. The recent easing of restrictions means that many productions are now back on stage, including Cinderella, the new musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Here's the BBC's Alan Yentob.
Yes, fingers crossed, theatre is back. COVID, all being well, is under control. Social distancing is over, for now. And Andrew Lloyd Webber's much anticipated new musical, Cinderella, is back in town.
3 years in the making, weeks of previews, then they were pinged and the show did not go on. This radical take on the Cinderella story was written by the Oscar winner, Emerald Fennell.
Well, here we are. So the show's on, eh?
You never know, but short of us having to be taken screaming from the theatre, it's going to open.
I have to say, this is unlike any other Cinderella that I've ever seen. This is, I mean, my phrase is this is a Cinderella for our time.
It's the most well-known story in the world, and so that it's good and bad. It means that the audience anticipates certain things, they expect certain things, and so really the conversation we had was, well, how do we do something new? How do we make it a story that feels exciting and gripping while still having all of the shoe, the clock at midnight, you know, the transformation, all those things. So it was about surprising the audience.
But I think the thing that converted me to finally doing it was the central message that Emerald's written, which is don't change yourself, because don't change yourself to be what you believe other people want you to be. And I think that's a very important message for our time, really. And it made me think, yeah, I can do this.
And they have.
That's Cinderella. Cinderella is the catty name that they call me. Hold me back, Cinderella. I will not say goodbye. You've been hateful since I've been.
It has joy, and I think it does have romance.
It has joy.
Even if the romance doesn't quite go the way that everybody might expect.
Has joy, it has romance, and crucially, and the thing that is most important to me anyway, is it has a fairly long erotic male dance sequence.
Well, that is, of course, the reason she did the show, but we don't need to go into that for this audience.
Alan Yentob on the new Cinderella. Now, it's time for a look at the weather with Louise Lear.
Thanks, George. I tell you what, I could do with a magic wand to change the weather story at the moment. It's cloudy, it's dull, isn't it? We are all literally going a bit stir crazy with the cloud cover that we've got at the moment. And there's more to come as we go through the night tonight and into tomorrow. Quite a lot of cloud tonight. Will be thick enough for a spot or two of drizzle across the north and the west. It's going to be quite a murky start as well, generally. And temperatures, well, bearing up, saying into, let's say, the mid-teens. So it will be a mild start, but it will be another grey one once again. There will be bits and pieces of brighter, sunnier moments coming through before we see a few scattered showers moving in from the west. Tomorrow really is going to be quite a messy picture to tell. Temperatures peaking at 13 to 21 degrees. That's still down on where they should be for this time of year. Now, as we move into Friday, it looks likely that actually will be a decent day. Yes, there is a weather front waiting in the wings to come in, but it will bring outbreaks of rain gradually in from the west. Ahead of it, we'll see some drier, brighter moments and potentially even some warmer weather to go with it as well. Highs of 23 or 24 degrees. That's 75 Fahrenheit. That leads us quite nicely into the weekend. We will continue to see some warmer weather developing across central and eastern areas, but unfortunately it could turn pretty wet, maybe even thundery as well. So the best of the weather, as you can see, through central and eastern England. The weather front will continue to move in from the west, and because the winds are quite light, it could be quite slow moving. So here 18 or 19 degrees. But look at this, if we get that sunshine and that weather front stays out to the west, we could see a high of 26 degrees somewhere in the southeast. It's not going to last as the weather front bumps into that very warm air. It's going to trigger off some sharp, thundery, slow-moving showers for Sunday. George.
Thank you very much, Louise. And that's all from the BBC's News at 6, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are.